Imagine building a city unlike anything humanity has ever seen. A city stretching across the desert in a perfectly straight line. No suburbs, no conventional roads, no cars moving between neighborhoods. Instead, two enormous mirrored walls rising 500 meters above the landscape, running through the mountains and desert of northwest Saudi Arabia. This is the Line, the most extraordinary part of Saudi Arabia's NEOM Megaproject, and one of the most ambitious urban experiments ever proposed. The original vision sounds almost impossible. A city 170 kilometers long, just 200 meters wide, 500 meters high, and eventually home to 9 million people. According to its designers, everything residents need would be within a short walk, while high-speed transportation would connect distant parts of the city. The Line promised something more than another futuristic development. It promised to reinvent the city itself. But several years after the world first saw its spectacular mirrored walls, an important question has become impossible to ignore. How much of this extraordinary vision can actually be built? And what is really happening in the Saudi desert today? To understand the Line, you first have to understand NEOM. In 2017, Saudi Arabia announced an enormous new development region in the northwest of the country. NEOM covers approximately 26,500 square kilometers, extending across mountains, desert, and the Red Sea coastline. It is part of Saudi Arabia's wider economic transformation. For generations, oil has played a central role in the Saudi economy. Vision 2030 aims to expand other industries, attract international investment, develop tourism, create new jobs, and position the kingdom as a global center for technology, logistics, and innovation. NEOM became one of the most visible symbols of that ambition. It would not be a single city. It would contain multiple developments with different purposes. Oxagon would focus on industry and logistics. Trojena would become a mountain tourism destination. Sindala would target luxury tourism. And then there was the Line, the project that captured the world's attention. The Line was first announced in 2021, but in 2022, Saudi Arabia revealed the architecture that transformed it from an unusual urban planning idea into a global spectacle. Two parallel mirrored structures would extend across the landscape. Between them would be a dense vertical city. Instead of allowing cities to expand outward across enormous areas, the Line would compress urban life into a narrow footprint. Homes, offices, schools, parks, shops, and entertainment would be stacked and connected vertically. The idea challenges more than a century of modern city planning. Traditional cities spread outward. As populations grow, roads become longer. Commuting distances increase. More land is consumed, and transportation networks become increasingly complicated. The Line proposes the opposite. Instead of spreading 9 million people across thousands of square kilometers, it would place them inside an extremely narrow urban corridor. In theory, this creates some extraordinary possibilities. Daily services could be located close to residents. Large areas of surrounding land could remain undeveloped. Conventional road traffic could disappear from the city, and public transportation could become the primary method of traveling longer distances. But compressing a city creates another problem. Vertical movement becomes just as important as horizontal movement. Millions of people would need to travel through elevators, pedestrian routes, transit stations, and shared public spaces every day. Water, electricity, waste, emergency services, and deliveries would all have to move through an urban structure unlike anything operating at this scale today. And then there is the building itself. 500 meters is taller than the Empire State Building's roof. Now imagine structures of that height continuing not for a few city blocks, but potentially across vast sections of desert. The quantities involved become difficult to comprehend. Excavation, concrete, steel, glass, power, water, transportation infrastructure, and enormous foundations capable of supporting a city-sized structure. Even before the buildings rise, engineers must prepare the ground. Satellite images and construction footage have shown enormous excavation works associated with the early development of the Line. Long trenches and foundation zones have appeared in the desert. Construction camps, roads, and supporting infrastructure have been developed. This is important because the Line is not simply a computer-generated concept. Real construction activity has taken place. But construction activity does not automatically mean the complete 170-kilometer vision will appear on the original timetable. And this is where the story becomes much more complicated. Megaprojects almost always change between concept and completion. Costs rise, engineering problems emerge, economic conditions change. Timelines move, designs evolve. But few megaprojects begin with ambitions as extreme as the line. The larger the original vision, the more difficult every adjustment becomes. Reports began emerging that Saudi Arabia was reconsidering the scale of what could realistically be delivered by 2030. Instead of thinking about the line as one enormous structure appearing across the desert at once, attention increasingly shifted toward delivering an initial section. This distinction is critical. A smaller first phase does not necessarily mean the long-term 170-kilometer concept has disappeared, but it dramatically changes what people should expect to see in the near future. The challenge is money as much as engineering. NEOM is backed by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, and Saudi Arabia has enormous financial resources. But resources are not unlimited. At the same time that NEOM is being developed, the kingdom is investing in tourism, entertainment, renewable energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, sports, housing, and other major projects. Every $1 billion committed to one project is capital that cannot simultaneously be used somewhere else. That creates a fundamental question. How much investment can the line absorb before the economic return becomes too distant or uncertain? NEOM has sought additional financing and partnerships as development continues, and Saudi Arabia's investment strategy is increasingly emphasizing efficiency, private sector participation, and long-term financial returns. That does not mean NEOM has disappeared from the national strategy. Far from it. NEOM remains part of the Public Investment Fund's long-term development portfolio, but the environment around the project is becoming more disciplined. The challenge is moving from spectacular vision to something that can be financed, constructed, populated, and operated. Because building the line is only half the problem. The other half is making people want to live there. A city is not simply architecture, it is millions of individual decisions. Where people work, where children go to school, where families meet, how businesses receive deliveries, how emergency vehicles operate, how residents move during rush hour, how neighborhoods develop identities, and how people interact with sunlight, open space, and nature. The line proposes a fundamentally different answer to almost every one of these questions. Supporters see that as its greatest strength. They argue that existing cities were designed around outdated transportation systems, and that future cities should be built around people, technology, and sustainability instead. Critics see the same radical design as its greatest risk. There is no existing 170-kilometer linear megacity with 9 million residents that engineers can study. There is no proven operating model at this scale. The line would therefore have to solve problems while simultaneously creating the system in which those problems exist. Transportation is one example. Removing conventional roads could reduce traffic, pollution, and the enormous amount of urban land dedicated to cars. But it would also make the reliability of public transportation absolutely critical. If millions of people depend on a limited number of high-capacity transport corridors, disruptions could affect large parts of the city. Emergency planning would also need to account for the unusual geometry of the development. Then there is the environment. NEOM says its model is intended to preserve large areas of surrounding nature and operate using renewable energy. The narrow footprint of the line is presented as a way to reduce urban sprawl, but constructing enormous structures in previously undeveloped landscapes also creates environmental questions of its own. Materials must be manufactured and transported. Construction requires energy. Water must be supplied. Habitats can be disrupted. And the environmental cost of construction must eventually be weighed against the claimed benefits of the completed city. This tension exists throughout the line. It is simultaneously an argument for sustainability and one of the largest construction experiments ever attempted. It is a plan to reduce infrastructure footprints that requires extraordinary infrastructure. It is designed to connect people more efficiently while creating a city geometry the world has never operated before. And perhaps that is why the line remains so fascinating. The project forces us to ask what a city actually needs to be. For most of human history, cities evolved gradually. Streets followed geography. Neighborhoods grew around markets. Transportation networks were added over generations. The line reverses that process. The system comes first. Then the city is expected to grow inside it. If successful, even a smaller version could influence architecture and urban planning far beyond Saudi Arabia. Technologies developed for vertical transportation, automated logistics, energy management, water systems, and high-density urban environments could eventually be applied elsewhere. But if the project struggles, it could become a warning about what happens when architectural ambition moves faster than economics, engineering, or human behavior. Today, the most realistic way to understand the line is not as a single 170-kilometer building that will suddenly appear in the desert. It is better understood as a long-term vision being tested through phases. The first sections matter enormously. They will determine whether the concept works outside architectural renderings. Can construction costs be controlled? Can the transportation model function? Can businesses be attracted? Can residents be convinced to move there? Can the city deliver the quality of life it promises? And perhaps most importantly, can the model be repeated? Because completing one section is not the same as completing the line. The extraordinary scale of the original concept means success must eventually be replicated again and again across the landscape. That could take decades, and the final result may look different from the images that first captured the world's imagination. That is not unusual. Almost every great city changes between plan and reality. The difference is that the line revealed its ultimate vision before the first neighborhood existed. The world saw the finished dream before engineers had finished solving the beginning. Saudi Arabia is now entering a crucial period for the project. Its investment strategy is shifting from rapid expansion toward greater value realization, investment efficiency, and private sector participation. NEOM remains part of that strategy, but spectacular renderings alone are no longer enough. The next phase must demonstrate construction, infrastructure, investment, residents, businesses, and functioning urban life. The line began with one of the boldest questions in modern architecture. What if we stopped building cities the way we have built them for centuries? Several years later, another question has become just as important. How much of that new idea can survive contact with reality? Perhaps the line will eventually become a revolutionary new model of urban life. Perhaps only part of the original vision will be constructed, or perhaps the project will continue evolving until the city that emerges is very different from the mirrored megastructure first shown to the world. For now, the answer is still being written in the desert. Machines are moving Earth. Infrastructure is being built. Billions of dollars are being committed. And Saudi Arabia is attempting to turn one of architecture's most extraordinary visions into something people can actually inhabit. The real story of the line is therefore no longer simply about how futuristic it looks. It is about whether unprecedented ambition can become practical infrastructure, whether a spectacular concept can become a functioning city, and whether the trillion-dollar dream can survive the enormous challenge of becoming reality.